Hello there, sweet squirrel listeners. Yeah, I got to you before night or midnight. I don't feel sleepy right now, but it doesn't guarantee anything. I'm liking the story, though, so far. How about y'all? Colin returned to Australia immediately afterwards. As he parted from his brother and sister-in-law, he said with a melancholy smile, "If only mischance befays me, you ken as soon as I do myself. Your awesome bairn will see it, and ye may tack for gospel ought told by ye, and that whatever the kid says, you can believe it." One fine afternoon, some 3 weeks after Colin had sailed, David, just then no particular work to keep him on the farm all day, proposed for a great treat to roast Sandy into Bass Rock. Oat cutting would shortly begin, and then he would not have a spare hour from morning to night. But today he and his son would enjoy a holiday together, and Sandy was to take with him the small gun that his father gave him on his last birthday, for he was now 9 years of age, and high time that he set about learning to kill something or other. All the Leighton boys seemed developed in the delicate child by the possession of the small fowling piece, like a bird, fowl, and he blazed away at the rats under the hayricks and at the sparrows on the roofs, to the peril alike of the poultry and of the bedroom windows. "Mother, mother, I'll shoot ye again and make ye a cushion o' the down," he shouted in wild excitement as he set forth on the expedition. Mrs. Galbraith stood on the doorstep watching her husband and son leave the house together. David, a stout, tall man in the prime of late middle life, red-faced and gray-haired, and Sandy, a lanky lad with pale, freckled face, but with more vigor in his step than the fond mother had ever expected to see. He carried his gun over his shoulder and strode along by his father's side, glancing up at him frequently to try to imitate his every look and gesture. David Galbraith was fond of the rowing, and as it was a very calm day, he dismissed the man in charge of the boat, and taking the oars himself, said it would do him good to row as far as the Bass Rock and back again. The sea was like a mill pond, a glassy stretch of water with here and there a wind flaw wrinkling its smooth surface. There was not a wave that could have displaced a pebble on the beach, and great masses of olive green seaweed floated motionless in its clear depths. To the left, high above them, stood the ruins of the Tantallon Castle, bathed in August sunshine, its gray walls taking warmth and color from the glow of the light that softened and beautified its rugged outline. Before them, the sullen mass of the Bass Rock towered above the blue water, circled by countless thousands of seabirds, the glitter of whose white wings was seen as silvery flashes of light from a distance too great to distinguish the birds themselves. They were near enough to the shore to hear voices and laughter borne over the water from the grassy enclosure before Tantallon Castle, and lowing of kine, K-I-N-E, let's see what that says it is. Cows, that's what I thought. The cattle are lowing. Let's see if it's pronounced like it looks. Oh, yeah. Kine. You heard it. Okay, now how do I get rid of this? How did I do this before? Take me back to where I was. Dang it. I'm on the story, but not at the right place. Here we are. And lowing of kine, which are the cattle, in the pastures, and as they neared the Bass Rock, these sounds were exchanged for the squealing of wildfowl, and the clang of their wings. To Sandy's delight, he was allowed to shoot from the boat, which he did with as little danger to the birds as to the fish, and the only condition his father imposed was that he should fire with his back towards him, till your aim is more precise, man, more precise. Though it soon became evident even to the sanguine calm. I need to look that up. Sandy, that he would bring home neither gannet nor, and that's bird, I think, nor kittiwake. It was a rapturous delight to be rowed about the island by his father, who told him the name of every bird he saw, and pointed out their nest on the precipitous face of the rock. Then David rested on his oars, and the boat scarcely moved on the still water, while Sandy ate the oat cake and drank the milk provided for him by his mother. And his father took a deep draught of his flask till his face grew crimson. "Father, give me a drink too," said Sandy, stretching out his hand. Nay, you'll stick to your milk drinking till you hae built up a strong frame. Then you may take as much whiskey as you will, to keep it in good repair." And now the boat was turned landward once more, and they soon lost sound of the clang of the seabird's wings, and the lowing of the kine was heard again, and David rowed slowly past the rock of Tantallon. After chattering for hours, Sandy had fallen silent and sat leaning his arm on the gunwale of the boat, looking into the limpid water, dipping his hand into the soft swelling wave and scattering a shower of glittering drops from his fingers. Suddenly, he's going to see something, I bet. Suddenly he ceased his idle play, and kneeling in the bottom of the boat, clung firmly to the side with both hands, leaned over and gazed intently in the water. His father, who was always on the alert where his son was concerned, at once noticed the change that had come over him, rowed quicker, and said cheerily, "What are you glowering at, man? Do you never see a herring in the sea before?" Sandy neither spoke nor stirred, and David took comfort in thinking that after all the lad could see nothing uncanny in the water. It was just some daft folly or other he was after, best unnoticed. But when Sandy did speak, it was to utter words for which he was unprepared. "Father, I see Uncle Colin in the water with his face turned up to me and his een wide open," his eyes. "But he cannot see with them. And the boy did not raise his head, but continued to gaze into the water. Drops of sweat broke out on Galbraith's brow, and he lifted the dripping oars high in the rowlocks and leaned towards Sandy, his red face now as white as the boy's. "Whether it's God's or the Dale speaks in ye, I dinna ken, but you'll drive you mad with your gruesome clavers. Hand up, man, and fling yourself back in the boat where you see naething waur than yoursel." But Sandy did not stir. "It's Uncle Colin that I see floating in the water, lappet in seaweed, and he's nae sleeping, for his een stares sae wide." And Galbraith, who would not have looked over the gunwale of the boat for his life, with an oath plunged the oars deep into the water and rowed with furious strokes. Ye struck the oar on his white face, shrieked the boy, and fell back crying in the boat. A heavy gloom settled on the Galbraiths, and this last hideous vision of Sandy's they kept strictly to themselves. They did not seek counsel of their minister or anyone. They were certain that Colin was drowned. It was a mere question of time when they could hear now how it had happened. But hear it they assuredly would. And Sandy, too, was gloomy and depressed. "The bairn has frighted himself this time as well as others," said his father, "and 'sma blame to him, but I would rather follow to the kirkyard than he should grow up with a second sight. It may have been a very well in a breekless, starving Highlander 100 years ago, but it's no consistent for a well-fed lowlander in these days of trousers and high farming. How is Sandy to do justice to the land and mind the rotation of crops if he goes daft with the second sight?" The oat harvest was plentiful and got together in fine condition, but neither David nor his wife had any heart to enjoy it. They simply lived through each day waiting for the tidings that must come, nor had they long to wait. Nearly a month after Sandy's vision, David read in the newspaper of the safe arrival of his brother's ship at the destination. It reported a prosperous voyage with but one casualty during its course, which occurred on the 24th day after sailing, when a passenger booked for Sydney had mysteriously fallen overboard in perfectly calm weather and was drowned. The gentleman's name was Mr. Colin Galbraith, and his sudden untimely end had cast a gloom over the ship's company. So far the newspaper report, which, brief as it was all that David and Allison could ever learn of their poor brother's fate. They carefully compared the dates and found that Colin had been drowned 3 days after Sandy had seen the vision of the body in the sea. "I winna tell the bairn that poor Colin is dead," said David gloomily. "We'll just tell the bairn he's dead, but you'll say naething of the drowning." "If they would have told him at the time, maybe he wouldn't have drowned." "What?" "'Cause Colin knows he's got the second sight, or knew he did." "Ye mun do as you think best, but I cannot mention poor Colin's name to him, and it was from his mother that Sandy heard of his Uncle Colin's death." He listened gravely and thoughtfully to the tidings. "Yes, it was him that I saw in the water, and that was all that he had to say about the death of his favorite uncle. He asked no question and made no further remark." From this time forward a great change came over David Galbraith. From being wholly matter-of-fact and little inclined to believe more than his senses could attest, he became credulous and superstitious. He trembled at omens and was unnerved for his day's work if his dreams overnight were unpropitious. He disliked being out on dark nights and cast uneasy glances over his shoulder as though he heard steps behind him. At times when he was riding, he thought that he heard someone following hard on his heels, and he would gallop for miles and reach home, horse and rider both in a sweat of fear. And Sandy, the unconscious cause of the evil change, and his father mutely wondered what had come over him. David scarcely let the boy out of his sight, though his society was a torment to him, and he was always wondering what would be the next shock he would receive. Unhappily, he tried to restore tone to his shaken nerves by drinking, and the habit grew quickly on him, to his good wife's great distress, and times were now so changed that Sandy was often more frightened of his father than his father was of him. Mrs. Galbraith proposed sending Sandy to stay with some relatives of her own at Linlithgow. thinking that it would do her husband good to have the strain of the boy's constant society removed for a while, but he would not hear of it and merely said, "The bairns shall bide at home." At home. "It's main weird, and I maun. It's main weird, and I maun dree it." Some 2 years passed by in which Sandy had no visions, and grew steadily healthier and stronger and more like other boys of his age, so that his mother began to think that they should make a man of him yet. But though his father noticed the physical improvement in his son with pride, nothing could persuade him that the dreaded gift had departed from him. In vain his wife tried to convince him that there was no further cause for anxiety. He shook his head and said, You'll no get rid of an ill gift sae lightly. It's a fire that burns low, but it'll burst into flame for that." In the third summer after Colin Galbraith was lost at sea, on a lovely summer evening, Mrs. Galbraith sat at an open window knitting and smiling placidly as she watched her son at work in his little plot of garden, watering the tufts of pinks and pansies. She laid her work in her lap, and her eyes followed his every movement with quiet pleasure. Sandy would make a good gardener. There was not a straggling growth in his plot, nor any weeds. All was neat and trim, and the flower beds were prettily bordered with shells he had collected on the beach at North Berwick. He was gathering a posy with fastidious care, and his mother knew that it was for her, and thought to herself that if he had been uncanny in time past, he was a good boy. His heart was in the right place. But something disturbed him in his work. He rose from stooping over the bed, dropped his flowers to the ground, and Allison thought he was listening to some faraway sound, till a change that passed over his face showed her that she was mistaken. Sandy was not listening, he was seeing. His face grew pale and his features pinched. His gray eyes were fixed while the color faded out of them, till they were almost white, and he shuddered as though a cold wind blew over him. Mrs. Galbraith rose silently, and assured by the deep breathing of her husband, who was sitting in an armchair by the hearth, that he was asleep, opened the door softly, left the room, and hurried into the garden. Then in the sunshine, surrounded by summer sights and summer scents, stood Sandy, a very image of midnight terror. His mother laid her large warm hands on his shoulders and gently shook him. Sandy, if you're seeing again, for God's sake, say nothing to your father. He cannot bear it. You'll tell me," she said in a frightened whisper. The boy gave a sigh, passed his hands over his eyes, and staggered as though he was dizzy. Allison grasped her son firmly by the arm. "Come away. If your father wakes and goes to the window, he'll see us. Come away." And she hurried the boy through the warm evening sunshine that had suddenly grown cold and dim to her, and led him to a retired part of the garden. "And now what was it that ye saw?" And looking at her with a strange expression of fear and compassion, Sandy said, "I saw my father lying on the road at the foot of the steep brae by Sir Ewan Campbell's gates, and his een were shut, but for that he was the same as Uncle Colin." The self-controlled, unemotional Allison Galbraith gave a smothered scream as she listened to her son, and seizing his arm in a passion of fear with a grip like a vice, said, Elspeth McPhee was right when she called you an awesome bairn. What for has God in his wrath given me such a child? And she shook him off and left him in his confused misery. If David Galbraith had not been overcome with drink that night, he would have seen that something terrible had occurred to agitate his wife. But when the drunken fit was spent, he noticed that she looked white and ill. "Allison, woman, you keep too close to the house," he said. "You should walk to the sea and breathe the colder air to bring the color back to your cheeks." The following Friday was the corn market at Haddington, and David Galbraith, sober, shrewd, and businesslike, set out to attend it, bent on driving a hard bargain. Allison stood at the gate as he mounted his horse to wish him good luck and to add a word of wifely admonition as to the advisability of not drinking too much whiskey before the return journey, and "You'll no be late coming home the night, Davy." "There's no night at this time of year, Allison. And you'll mind to come by the level road. There's the steep brae beyond the Campbell's gates, and I'd rather you give it a wide berth and come by the long road." "Not I, woman. Do you expect me to make a midnight ride a mile longer just to avoid a brae that I ken as well as my own doorstep?" "Kelpie'll be sober, deuce beast, if his master's not, and he knows every," it says kins, but I mean knows, "every stain on the hill. You'll go to bed and leave this house door unlocked for me." And David gave his horse a touch with the whip, and away he trotted. And I think I must stop right there, guys. Not sure how much more we got, but that's a pretty good bit. About 20-ish minutes at a time. Me stumbling over these Scottish words. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. See you tomorrow at 3. Unless I see you tonight at Kelly's. Kelly's Crochet Adventure should be on tonight around. Usually on Saturday nights it's about 9:30, somewhere around there. Love y'all. Bye-bye.